Matthew scrutinized the divorce papers and smirked. Really, Lisa? You think you'll make it on your own? Without me, you're nothing. His words stung, but I wouldn't let him see it. I kept my expression firm, biting back the retort on the tip of my tongue. Instead, I took a deep breath and assessed the living room. It was a typical suburban home in a mid-sized American city. Everything was incredibly well organized, a stark contrast to Matthew's perpetual messiness. I broke the silence. We'll see about that. Matthew laughed, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. You've never been on your own? You think you can just leave? I'm not thinking, Matthew. I'm doing it. He shrugged, picking up his phone and scrolling through it lazily. Go ahead. You'll come crawling back when you realize you can't handle it. Ignoring him, I moved to the kitchen, the one safe space left in the house. Memories of happier times cluttered my mind every time I stepped through the door. The kitchen was like a parallel universe compared to Matthew's chaos, the harmony amid discord. As I filled the kettle, I heard the low murmur of Matthew's voice from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed to the doorway. Yeah, she's finally taking the bait, Matthew said, his voice muffled as he spoke into the phone. Really thought she was something, but she's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Can't even keep up with the simplest tasks. My stomach churned. The person I had spent years supporting, laughing with, and loving was selling me short to his friends like I was some joke. Determined to keep my emotions in check, I focused on pouring the hot water over my tea bag, watching the steam curl upward. Matthew's voice grew louder. She thinks she's got this big plan to leave me and start fresh. Honestly, it's pathetic. Once a quitter, always a quitter. The words cut through me, each one a tiny jab that threatened to bring tears to my eyes. I held my breath, willing myself not to cry. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I returned to the living room, teacup in hand. You done making your little jokes? Matthew hung up the phone, not even bothering to disguise his irritation. Were you eavesdropping? I didn't need to eavesdrop to know what you think of me. He shrugged. You're oversensitive. It's just harmless banter. Harmless? I echoed. You're belittling me to your friends. They know the truth about you. Maybe you should start accepting it, too. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the door. I'm going out. Don't wait up. The door closed with a finality that echoed in our strangely silent house. I watched him leave, each step he took away opening a small window of relief in my chest. When the headlights of his car vanished down the street, I exhaled deeply, sipping my now lukewarm tea. This was my test, my chance to prove him wrong. For too long, I'd allowed Matthew to dictate the terms of my life, convincing myself I was nothing without him. But now, it's time to be something more. I walked to the living room, grabbed the divorce papers, and sat at the desk with a pen in hand. I felt a surge of determination, this time different. This time, it was real. I signed my name with purpose, each stroke of the pen a declaration of independence. I'm not nothing, Matthew. I'm just beginning. I stared at the signature on the divorce papers, feeling a strange mix of resolve and uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. As I moved the papers aside, memories of our early days flooded back, uninvited. Matthew and I met at work. He was charismatic, effortlessly charming everyone around him. I was drawn to that magnetism, almost helplessly. Our romance was whirlwind, filled with grand gestures and sweet promises. Early on, we were inseparable. I left my job to support his career, convinced by his words and my own naive belief that it was for the best. Helping Matthew at work started small. A few emails here, a report there. Soon I was practically running his department from behind the scenes. He'd prop up the image while I managed the reality. Our professional dynamics evolved, except it wasn't evolution, it was exploitation. I recalled a recent conversation with one of his old coworkers, Cam. We ran into each other at a grocery store. Hey, Lisa. Long time no see, Cam greeted, throwing some vegetables into his cart. What have you been up to these days? I forced a smile. Oh, still helping Matthew with his work. You know how it is. Cam's eye roll was slight but noticeable. Yeah, everyone knows how it is with Matthew. The guy's a legend in his own mind. I frowned. What do you mean? He's always talking about how he runs the show. Calls himself a genius, but we all know who's really doing the work. I forced a laugh. Oh, you know Matthew. Always boasting. Cam leaned in, whispering conspiratorially. Actually, some folks say he takes credit for your work. Heard it more than once around the office. The conversation stayed with me, gnawing at my sense of loyalty and justice. Over time, Matthew's reliance on me didn't breed gratitude but contempt. He treated me like his personal assistant, his condescending attitude growing more frequent. Each task I handled, every problem I solved, felt like another nail in the coffin of our supposed partnership. Days after that grocery store encounter, I was at Matthew's office, dropping off some paperwork he had conveniently forgotten. As I waited, I overheard snippets of a hushed conversation between two of his colleagues in the break room. "You hear about Matthew's latest screw-up?" one asked, chuckling. "Which one? Seems like there's a new one every week." "Guy's useless without Lisa," the other replied. My blood boiled, but I walked away quickly, pretending I hadn't heard. Pretending had seemed easier back then. Sitting now in my quiet kitchen, I realized just how deeply the facade went, how much I had buried to keep the peace. I could no longer ignore the extent of Matthew's disrespect. He had built his success on my efforts and derided me behind my back. I picked up my phone and dialed Rebecca, my lawyer and longtime friend. Her voice was a lifeline. "Rebecca, it's time," I said, my voice steady. "All right, Lisa. I'll start the paperwork. We'll get this done." Clicking off, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Empowerment. The next step in my journey was clear. This was just the beginning, and Matthew had no idea what was coming. I folded the last of the laundry and heard the front door slam. Matthew was home early, which was never a good sign. He stormed into the living room, his face flushed with anger. "Lisa," he barked, "get in here." I walked in, my hands still slightly damp from the laundry. "What's wrong?" He held up his phone, shoving it in my face. "Why did someone tell me you were snooping around at my office?" I took a step back. "I wasn't snooping, Matthew. I went to drop off those papers like you asked." "Yeah, and what else did you do? Gossip with my coworkers? Try to undermine me?" I leveled my gaze at him. "Undermine you? You don't need my help for that." He glared at me, his eyes darkening. "Watch it, Lisa. I can ruin you." "I've already signed the divorce papers, Matthew. You think you can still scare me?" He threw his hands up in the air. "Papers mean nothing. You'll crawl back when you realize you can't handle life without me." The doorbell rang, breaking the tense silence. I opened the door to find Cam standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, Lisa, can I talk to you for a second?" "Sure, Cam. What's up?" Cam glanced past me at Matthew, who was still fuming. "I think you should know something. Matthew's been talking a lot of trash about you at work." Matthew scoffed from the couch. "Oh, here we go." Ignoring Matthew, Cam continued. "He says you're incompetent, that you can't handle anything on your own." My heart pounded. I know he's been bad-mouthing me. I've heard it before. Cam shifted uneasily. "It's worse than that. Matthew's been flirting with Karen Blake. More than flirting, actually." I looked at Matthew, who was trying and failing to act nonchalant. "Karen? Really, Matthew?" "What?" he said, feigning innocence. "She's just a friend." "Yeah, a friend. A friend who sends you heart emojis and late-night texts." I shot back, my voice rising. Matthew's eyes narrowed. "Don't pretend to be the victim here. You're overreacting. Karen's harmless." Cam stepped in. "Actually, I saw them together. They looked pretty cozy during that business dinner last week." I turned to Matthew. "Care to explain?" He rolled his eyes. "It was a business dinner. Get over it." I couldn't believe him. My mind raced, piecing together the lies, the disrespect, the sheer arrogance. I needed proof, and I needed it fast. "I'm done, Matthew. This marriage is over, and you know it." He smirked. "Good luck. You'll never manage without me." I stared at him, the man I'd devoted years of my life to, and felt only cold resolve. We'll see about that. As he stormed out, I thanked Cam for confirming what I already suspected. Knowing Matthew's true colors gave me the fuel I needed. I started gathering evidence, documenting everything. His texts, his meetings, even looking through his finances. I had pictures of him and Karen at various outings. His secrets were unraveling, and with each new piece of information, I realized how little I actually knew Matthew. But it wasn't just about exposing his infidelity. It was about taking back control. I called Rebecca again, sharing my discoveries. She listened, understanding the full weight of what I had uncovered. "We'll use this, Lisa," she assured me. "This will solidify your case." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of calm. This was no longer about just leaving. This was about getting my life back from a man who had taken too much from me. As I put away my phone, I promised myself that Matthew's reign of manipulation would end, one way or another. I sat at my desk, the cold blue glow of my laptop screen lighting up the documents and pictures scattered around me. Each piece of evidence felt like a step closer to reclaiming my life. Matthew's texts, financial records, and photos with Karen all painted a clear picture. He had underestimated me, and that was about to be his downfall. Rebecca met me the next day at a quiet cafe. I spread the documents out on the table between us. "This is solid," she said, flipping through the evidence. "Matthew really let his guard down. He thinks I'm still that naive woman he married," I replied, my voice steady. Rebecca smiled. "But you're so much more than that now. This will help us build a strong case for your divorce." We spent the next hour strategizing, discussing how to use this evidence to counteract any claims Matthew might make. The plan was coming together, and I felt more confident by the minute. Back home, I knew the next step was to hit Matthew where it hurt. His job. I accessed the company's systems, leveraging my knowledge from years of running things behind the scenes. I started small, ensuring vital information was missing or incorrect. It wouldn't be traceable back to me, but the effects would be noticeable. Days later, Matthew came home, visibly agitated. "Work was a nightmare today," he grumbled, throwing his jacket onto the couch. "Really?" I asked innocently. "What happened? Some crucial data went missing. Then we discovered a bunch of errors in the reports. It's chaos." I nodded, suppressing a smile. "Sounds tough." "You have no idea," he said, rubbing his temples. "And I'm the one who's going to take the fall if this isn't fixed." That night, I continued to sabotage his work, planting seeds for more chaos. The next week, he came home fuming. "Lisa, everything's falling apart." He paced the living room, panic clearly etched on his face. "Every time we fix one problem, 2 more pop up." "Strange," I replied, barely containing my satisfaction. "Maybe you should look at your team's performance." Deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before his incompetence would be exposed. I just had to keep pushing. One evening, as Matthew was out, I sat down with Rebecca to finalize my plans. The divorce papers were one thing, but we needed the perfect timing to ensure everything would collapse simultaneously. "Focus on the next big project he's handling," Rebecca advised. "If we can create enough disruption there, the fallout will be catastrophic for him." I nodded, understanding the significance. This was more than revenge. This was my liberation. I'll make it happen. The big project was a merger deal Matthew had been bragging about for weeks. I accessed critical documents and altered key details, ensuring he wouldn't notice until it was too late. As the deadline approached, Matthew's panic grew. The night before the final presentation, he was frantically reviewing his notes. "Why isn't any of this making sense?" he muttered, eyes darting over the papers. I watched him with a calm, detached demeanor. "You're probably just tired," I offered. "Maybe sleep on it." Sleep with this mess? He stomped off to his study, leaving me alone in the living room. Early the next morning, Rebecca texted me. "Ready?" I replied, "More than ready." I took the divorce papers from the drawer, just every line of ink a testament to my resolve. Today, Matthew's world would crumble, and I would be there to watch it fall, stronger and freer than I'd been in years. This was my turn to rise. The morning light filtered through the blinds as I sipped my coffee, awaiting the inevitable fallout at Matthew's office. The merger deal was set to be finalized today, and I knew the errors I'd planted would come to light like a ticking time bomb. Around midday, my phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. "It's happening. I just got word from a friend at the company. The project's blown up in his face." I felt a surge of satisfaction. Perfect. I'll be ready. An hour later, Matthew burst through the door, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "Everything's gone to hell," he spat, flinging his briefcase against the wall. "The merger is dead. Dead! They're blaming me for the failures." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" He shouted, pacing like a caged animal. "We lost crucial files. The figures were all wrong. They think I sabotaged it." "Maybe you should have double-checked everything," I said calmly. "It's your responsibility, isn't it?" He whipped around, eyes blazing. "You don't understand, Lisa. This could ruin me." I met his gaze, unflinching. Maybe you should have thought about that before treating everyone, including me, like they're beneath you. His anger shifted to a sneer. You think you're so special? Signing those divorce papers doesn't make you independent. You'll come crawling back, mark my words. I stood up, walking over to the desk and picking up the divorce papers. Actually, Matthew, I brought them for you to sign. Given your current predicament, I'd say the timing is perfect. He laughed bitterly. You think these papers mean anything? You're nothing without me. We'll see about that. I placed the papers firmly in front of him. Sign them, Matthew. He grabbed a pen, his hand shaking with rage, and scrawled his name angrily across the bottom. I gathered the papers, feeling an overwhelming sense of triumph. At that moment, his phone buzzed incessantly with calls. He ignored it, glaring at me instead. You think this is over? You'll regret this. Mark my words. I stayed silent, my resolve unshaken. He stormed out, leaving the house in turmoil, his world crumbling around him. That night, I sat quietly in the living room, absorbing the moment. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter. The next steps were clear. I needed to finalize the divorce and reclaim my life in full. A few days later, the news broke at Matthew's company. He was publicly reprimanded, demoted from his high-ranking position. The scandal of the botched merger rippled through the company, leaving his reputation in tatters. Matthew's calls grew desperate, but I ignored them. Finally, he appeared at the door again, a shadow of his former self. Lisa, this is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. You and me, like old times. I looked at him, seeing the man who once held me captive under his thumb, now reduced to pleading. There are no old times, Matthew, only what's next. And for me, that doesn't include you. As he stood there, dumbfounded, I closed the door on him, and that part of my life, for good. This was the end of Matthew's reign over me, but just the beginning of my true independence. I had torn down the walls of my old life and was finally stepping into my own, no longer confined by his manipulations. The future was mine, built on my terms. The news of Matthew's public demotion spread like wildfire. His once admired reputation crumbled, and the fallout from the botched merger left him ostracized at work. I could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from his coworkers. A week later, I walked into the office of David Walsh, my former boss. He greeted me with a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Lisa, it's been too long. Sit down, let's catch up. I took a seat, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift slightly. Thanks for seeing me, David. Are you kidding? We've missed you around here, he said, leaning back in his chair. I heard about what happened with Matthew. How are you holding up? I'm doing better, actually. It's been tough, but it's also been a wake-up call. I'm ready to get back into the workforce. David nodded, his expression serious. Matthew never appreciated what he had in you, Lisa. You were always the backbone, and it's about time you got the recognition you deserve. Thank you, David. I have a lot to offer, and I'm ready to prove it. Good, he said, leaning forward. How would you feel about coming back on board? We need someone with your skills and experience. My heart leapt. I'd love that. I'm more than ready. As we discussed the details, a sense of liberation washed over me. This was the turning point I had been waiting for, a chance to rebuild not only my career, but my entire life. Back home, I started job hunting in earnest, sending out resumes and setting up interviews. I reconnected with former colleagues, each conversation a reminder of my capabilities and talents. The process was invigorating, a stark contrast to the stifling environment I had endured with Matthew. Meanwhile, Matthew's desperation grew. He called repeatedly, each message more frantic than the last. Lisa, please call me back. We need to talk. I can fix this. I ignored him, focusing on my own path. One evening, as I prepared for an interview, Matthew showed up at the door again, looking haggard. Lisa, you have to help me, he pleaded. I crossed my arms, standing firm. Help you? After everything you've done? You don't understand. They're transferring me to a dead-end position. My career is over. I felt a flicker of pity, but quickly smothered it. That's your problem, not mine. You made your bed, Matthews. Now you have to lie in it. His face twisted in anger. You'll regret this, Lisa. You think you're better off without me, but you'll see. You'll come crawling back. I shook my head, closing the door on his threats. Goodbye, Matthew. The next weeks flew by. I landed a prestigious role at a new company, my skills and resilience impressing my new boss. The sense of accomplishment was exhilarating, each day a reminder that I was capable and deserving of success. Matthew, on the other hand, continued to spiral downward. The transfer to a trivial position sealed his professional downfall, and his reputation was beyond repair. He tried to take legal action, desperate to hold on to the last shreds of his former life, but Rebecca and I were prepared. We had the evidence, the paperwork, and the resolve to see it through. In our final confrontation, he attempted to get Lisa back through legal means, but I revealed all the documentation. "You're finished, Matthew," I said with a calm finality. "I've moved on. It's time you do the same." With each passing day, I felt stronger, vindicated. I had not only reclaimed my career, but my sense of self. Matthew's downfall was complete, a testament to his own deceit and arrogance. As I flourished in my new role, his life continued to unravel. This was my victory, my liberation, and as I moved forward, I knew the future was mine to shape, free from the shadows of the past. I was on my way home from work, feeling blissfully tired after a fulfilling day at my new job, when I received a call from Rebecca. "Lisa, we've got a problem. Matthew is trying to contest the divorce. He's claiming you manipulated him into signing the papers." I pulled into my driveway, gripping the steering wheel. "He's desperate, Rekka. Are we prepared to handle this?" "Absolutely, but it means another court date. He's not letting go easily." "All right," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be ready." The court date arrived quicker than I expected. Matthew looked haggard, but his eyes were filled with defiance as he sat across from me. His lawyer stood up first, spouting allegations that made my blood boil. Miss Hartman exploited Mr. Hartman's emotional state, coercing him into signing the divorce papers, the lawyer declared, pointing at me with undue dramatics. I whispered to Rebecca, "This is nonsense." Rebecca nodded. "Let me handle this." She stood, her voice level but firm. "Your Honor, we have ample evidence that Mr. Hartman willingly signed the divorce papers with full understanding. Moreover, we have documentation proving his ulterior motives and abusive behavior throughout the marriage." Matthew scoffed. "She's lying. I was under immense pressure. None of this is fair." The judge eyed Matthew skeptically. "Mr. Hartman, your claims lack substantial evidence. Based on the provided documents and testimonies, it's clear that Miss Hartman has grounds for divorce." I watched as the realization hit him. His face twisted in anger. "You'll regret this, Lisa. Mark my words. This isn't over." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "Actually, it is over, Matthew." The judge finalized the divorce, and I walked out of the courtroom feeling lighter, the weight of our toxic marriage finally lifted from my shoulders. A few weeks after the court ruling, I learned that Matthew had been transferred to a menial position in a remote office. His life had unraveled completely, a stark contrast to his former arrogance. One evening, as I reviewed files for a big project, my phone rang. It was David. "Lisa, I have some great news. We're promoting you to lead the new strategic planning division. Your work has been outstanding." I could hardly contain my excitement. "Thank you, David. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," he replied warmly. "Congratulations, Lisa. You've earned this." My career was thriving, and my life was finally coming together. That night, I celebrated with close friends, toasting to new beginnings and the strength to overcome past struggles. Meanwhile, Matthew's life continued its downward spiral. His arrogance had led to his downfall, and there was no one left to clean up his messes. He was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. As I looked around at my friends, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and triumph. I had reclaimed my life, my career, and my dignity. The shadow of Matthew's toxic presence had faded, replaced by the bright possibilities of the future. The final showdown with Matthew was over, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever. The path ahead was mine to walk, free from manipulation and deceit. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of peace. The drama, the revenge, and the struggle had all led me to this moment, and I was ready to embrace every opportunity that came my way, confident in who I had become. I spent the next weeks settling into my new role, thus flourishing in a supportive environment that valued my contributions. Life was finally coming together. One Saturday morning, I was tidying up when the doorbell rang. Answering it, I was surprised to find Matthew's mother, Eleanor, and his sister, Nancy, standing there, looking somber. "Lisa, we need to talk," Eleanor said with an edge in her voice. I stepped aside, motioning them into the living room. "Come in." Once seated, Eleanor wasted no time. "How could you do this to Matthew? He's family. You're tearing us apart." Nancy chimed in, her tone accusatory. "You abandoned him when he needed you the most. What kind of person does that?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You both have no idea what I went through. Matthew's lies, his manipulations, and his affairs were too much to bear." Eleanor's face hardened. "He's your husband. You made vows to stand by him." I held her gaze. "And he broke those vows repeatedly. Why should I stay with a man who treats me like I'm nothing?" Nancy crossed her arms. "We've known Matthew longer than you, Lisa. He needs love and support, not betrayal." "Support?" I laughed bitterly, like how he supported me by belittling my efforts and taking credit for my work. Eleanor looked taken aback, but she wasn't giving up. "People make mistakes. Families forgive." "There's a limit, Eleanor," I said firmly. "Matthew's arrogance and deceit are his downfall, not my doing." Nancy finally dropped her confrontational stance, seeming to remember who I was to Matthew once, before everything fell apart. "What happened, Lisa? He wasn't always this way." I sighed, feeling a mix of old pains and new strength. "No, he wasn't. But power corrupted him, and he lost sight of what we had. I couldn't save him from himself." Eleanor's face softened slightly. "We didn't know it was that bad. But you must understand, he's still our family." "I understand," I replied, calm, my voice softer but resolved. "But I had to choose my well-being over his dysfunction. I hope you can, too." The room fell silent. Eleanor and Nancy exchanged looks, but said nothing more. They got up to leave, Eleanor pausing at the door. "We'll always care about you, Lisa, but this is hard for us to accept." "I know," I said, holding back a wave of complex emotions. "And I appreciate that, but I had to do what was right for me." As they left, I felt a sense of closure. The confrontation had opened old wounds, but it confirmed my choices. I returned to my desk, looking at the projects awaiting me. My life was moving forward, and I could feel its pace quickening in ways that excited rather than overwhelmed me. Reflecting on my journey, I recognized my transformation. From a supportive wife lost in her husband's shadow, I had become an independent individual charting her own path. I had faced manipulation, deceit, and familial conflict, and had come out stronger on the other side. With a deep breath, I tidied up the remaining reminders of my past, consigning them to a box that would be stored away. My future was now full of potential, unclouded by the failures and betrayals that once held me back. I smiled, feeling a wave of contentment wash over me. The final ties to my past were cut. The world awaited, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. This was my new beginning, built on my terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of peace and purpose.